action on DACA. We ensure that there's deferred action going forward until Congress acts, and then we work with Congress to act to ensure that not only do Dreamers have the opportunity to stay here, but they stay here as full U.S. citizens to contribute to their full potential to our shared success. We will then work with Congress on an ambitious set of immigration proposals to include the nearly 9 million green card holders who are here in this country. We want to make sure that they become U.S. citizens as quickly as possible. So we waive all fees for their citizenship application.
I like that.
We mail them an already filled out application form. So when they became green card holders, they had to fill out all this paperwork. We have all that stuff on file. Let's mail back the filled out application so there's no delay or wait for them to become full U.S. citizens, much as many around the table have been able to do. Again, that adds to the nature of this country of immigrants. And though this shouldn't be the compelling factor, it will add hundreds of billions of dollars to the gross domestic product, to taxes that are paid at the federal, state, and local levels. It means that this economy is firing on all cylinders. More than 11 million who are here undocumented. We bring them forward, ensure that they can register with the government so that we know who is in our communities. They're able to work legally. Many of you have mentioned that some unscrupulous employers are using the leverage of documented or undocumented status to pay at below a living wage or to abuse those who are under their employment. We make sure that their rights are protected and that they're more able to fully contribute. And again, not just economically, democratically, civically, improving quality of life, all the things that we understand, but that we want to make sure that this country fully lives going forward. We create a new category of visas, and we want to work with this community. We want to work with Imam Solomon. We want to work with every community in this country. If a community or a mosque or a church or a temple wants to sponsor a refugee to come here to this country, and we know that refugees are the most heavily vetted population to enter our borders, and at no cost to the federal government, we want to make sure that they're cared for, they're integrated into this community. They revealed their genius here in the United States of America. We're going to give you the power to be able to do it. And then lastly, as Trustee Solis said, we haven't seen this in this country in decades. We're going to elevate the priority of the Western Hemisphere. Those people to whom we are connected literally by land, by language, by culture, by family, invest in their success because it is our shared success. If we can reduce violence in the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, fewer families have to contemplate that 2,000-mile journey to come here to our country. They can be successful where they are, and we do it in partnership with the people in their communities, with other governments in the region, a true hemispheric leader. That's what I want the United States to be, not hiding behind walls, not trying to make us afraid of one another, but leading together in concert. That's America at its best. And lastly, I want us to get off the back foot and off of being defensive about who we are. Let's be proud, let's be ambitious, let's be bold, let's never apologize. To those who say, we can begin all this ambitious work, Beto, after we have secured our communities, let's say, look, the security that we have in Dallas, the security we have in El Paso, one of the safest cities in the United States of America, the security you experienced in McAllen in the Rio Grande Valley, that's not despite, that's because we are cities of immigrants. That's the basis of our success, of our safety, and of our strength. And let's never apologize for it. Queremos compartir, si queremos asegurar más nuestras comunidades, necesitamos reformar nuestras leyes de inmigración, necesitamos tratar cada persona con el respeto y dignidad que merecen como humanos. Podemos hacer and we can do it, but we've got to do it together. And so that's why I asked you all to come together today. I've said more than enough, so I now need to listen to you. Tell me how we can strengthen this plan, or tell me through your own stories or the stories of others that you know or in your families, how we can illustrate why this is urgent and why we've got to move on it. As Domingo said, within the first 100 days, this legislation needs to be moving so that we can realize this potential. I'll turn it over to you, and yeah. Trustee Solis, anything you want to add?
No, other than, this is a bold package of changes. It is the most robust rewrite of immigration law and policy in a generation. And it's written in the spirit of America, what has always made this country great. Each of you in front of you, if you don't already recognize this, have got 9 pages worth of concepts that are in these 3 different tenets. But at this point, the floor is open. We'd love to get your thoughts on this, maybe your own experiences and how they relate to the things that you've heard from Beto. And we can start with anybody who'd like to open up the floor. Eric, we'll start with you.
Sure, and thank you so much for this opportunity. And I couldn't be more excited about this immigration plan. One thing that I've been trying to research more about, and for over 10 years, I had the fortunate opportunity to study Europe, and study European Union law. And in the short amount of time that I was there, I recognized they have something that we don't have, and that is a trade agreement that provides for the free movement of goods and the free movement of labor. So I just ask that when you craft an immigration plan, that we also target the non-immigrant population as well. And when I say non-immigrants, I mean the people who come to the United States who don't necessarily want to stay here for the rest of their lives. I have so many clients who come and they say, I just came because my family was experiencing economic hardship. I came unlawfully. I started working here. After a year, I was pretty satisfied with the money that I made because that's more than I made in 10 years. But I got stuck here because if I leave, I can never come back. And I want the opportunity to keep advancing and keep sending money home, but the opportunity doesn't exist. And I always felt that the European Union did a great job at addressing that and the free movement of labor in their free trade agreement that I know is a non-starter. From our talks with Miguel and Solis and I did through the Center for American Progress down in Mexico City when the free NAFTA was being renegotiated to the USMCA, we knew from the top leadership that if we bring that up with the United States, it's going to be a non-starter. So I feel like we in the United States are going to have to be the first ones to say this is necessary, and it's necessary for so many different reasons. And when I speak to my most conservative Republican friends about this idea, they all say, "Oh yeah, I could jump on board with that," and because they kind of recognize the benefits. You have a huge population of people who want to come to the United States. We can vet them. We can make sure that they don't have any criminal history, and all the admissibility categories apply to them. You have industries in the United States like farmers, ranchers, and manufacturing that absolutely need these people. They want these people. And it could benefit the American taxpayer because while they're here, they're paying taxes at federal, state, local level. They could also pay into Social Security and never draw out from it because they're going back to their home countries at the end of it. And when I speak to the non-immigrant populations about that, they say, "Oh yeah, I mean, if I had an opportunity to come work 1 to 2, 3 months out of the year and go back, I would love to do that because it's not someone's natural instinct to pick up and leave their family and leave their country and
They're
leave their
proud of
culture."
their countries too. They are proud of their communities. They want to be with their families. And sometimes we need to have the humility of recognizing that not everyone wants to be a U.S. citizen or stay in this country, but they want to provide for their families, may not be able to do so in the communities that they're living in now, may have been disproportionately impacted by things like NAFTA, may be affected by the droughts that we see in Honduras, no longer able to raise the food that they need, are willing to do some of the most backbreaking work here in the United States that no one born in the United States is willing to do. So our plan calls for lifting these visa caps and where necessary, these per country caps to allow for those who want to come and work or join family and not wait in a line that I know our attorneys have seen last 20, 22 years in some cases. So thank you for raising that.
As you go to ask your question, if you wouldn't mind speaking into the mic, we'll go to Bill and then we'll go to Chris.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I think is one of the most insidious things that's happened this year, I was really pleased to see was addressed in your plan, is the independence of the immigration courts, particularly the Bureau of Immigration Appeals. That's probably the greatest need for the Central American migrants is the fact that the Attorney General made ARCG a direct target of the government to do away with the legal protection for women that are escaping domestic violence from the Northern Triangle. So and that's always going to be a risk as long as the immigration courts are under the political influence of the executive branch, and particularly this one, but any executive branch could exercise that influence. So I commend that.
You have the prosecutor and the judge on the same team under this current system. So moving these over to true Article 1 courts, having independence of the judiciary. And one of the things that we call for, and this is again about us getting off the back foot and being defensive, is guaranteeing legal representation to everyone who arrives at our borders seeking asylum or who find themselves through this immigration or asylum process. Is there an expense to that? Absolutely. But there's a benefit that far outweighs that. I mentioned the family case management program earlier. We've seen 100% show rate to immigration court proceedings for those who are in the program. We pay $300 a day to lock somebody up in detention. We pay $30 a day for the family case management program. They're out of detention, they're in the community, they're following our laws. But we want every single person who's in this process to have representation. And for those attorneys, many of them around the table who've done this pro bono in so many cases, you are my heroes, both in this administration and I want to tell you in the last administration. We went out to Artesia, New Mexico, 3 hours from the nearest city, El Paso, Texas. The only people who were advocating for these Central American families were AILA attorneys who were doing it for free at tremendous cost to themselves. So let's take the inspiration and institutionalize that, pay for those attorneys, and make sure that folks follow our laws and have an advocate through that process, and we return these courts to true Article 1. And then 2 quick points, because these are important, Bill. You mentioned that women who are the victims of abuse and violence under this administration are no longer protected, and that's no longer a condition for claiming credible fear in our asylum process, nor is persecution by these gangs that were created in the U.S. jail system and exported to Central America in the first place. We also need to change that day one of our administration. Thank you for raising those points.
We'll go to Chris next, and then we'll come to Terry.
Just to piggyback off of Mr. Fuente and Mr. Olson, and before I do that, I wanted to say thank you to the trained lawyers as well as the people who have been working not just on my behalf, but on behalf of a lot of people here in this country. I do think history will smile on you. For me, I'm only 20, so I hadn't reached that maturation period yet when 2013 came along and DACA happened. So there were a lot of people doing work for me, and I had no idea the benefits that would come from that. And I know that my generation is going to be forever grateful as we continue to learn the sacrifices and the work that you guys have put in for us. So I really do appreciate that. But to go off of what Mr. Fuente said, my generation doesn't learn this, but there used to be a system where you could go and come back. And it was very easy. It was a merry-go-round, and like you said, immigrants could come in, benefit the economy, go back home to their families, and everyone was pretty happy, and they would pay taxes. And that was originally the intention. But it was a little more difficult now in 2001 because when my family came, originally we sent my father over. My mom's best friend was killed in Colombia, so she thought we had to flee just for safety, but we couldn't apply for a refugee visa right off the bat. We had to go like now. So we came on travel visas, overstayed that, which was only 6 months, and after 9/11, it became a lot more difficult to apply for any refugee status. So we were stuck here. My mother has not seen her family in almost 20 years. My father's mom and my father's dad are both incredibly ill. His mother has dementia, his father has cancer. So he is on a daily basis FaceTiming them with tears in his eyes, and he just wants to see his family. So a lot of people focus on the negative aspects of how we're treated here, but they also forget to focus on the fact that there are families not in the United States affected by what happens. All we can do is send money, but after a while, money doesn't mean much. You know, I don't know my grandparents. I don't know my cousins. I don't know my aunts. I don't know my uncles, and that's really painful. And you two were speaking earlier. I see a lot of my mother in you as well. And you know, I was raised by strong women, my older sister and my mother. So it really is a privilege. And so I can't speak to the legal aspects, anything like that, because I'm not a trained lawyer, I'm just a kid, but I can speak from experience. And so I did want to just say I'm grateful. And there's just a couple things that I wanted people to keep in mind, that there are more people just affected, not just by this administration, but by its laws here and all over the world.
Thank you for sharing that. And I gotta tell you, I'm so impressed at the way that you began your comments by thanking those who made your story possible, your family, attorneys, advocates who pushed on the Obama administration to implement deferred action for childhood arrivals. And I gotta tell you, you have this absolutely right, and you bring into focus the human dynamic of this, of families who've been separated under this administration, but let's be honest with ourselves, under previous administrations as well. This is a problem that predates the disaster of the Trump administration. He's made it much worse, but this takes us out of the abstraction of 11 million people and the laws we want to change into the human stories. And I'll tell you, in El Paso, where I'm from, when I was a member of Congress, we could work with Customs and Border Protection on humanitarian paroles. If it was someone in your situation who wanted to see their grandmother in Ciudad Juarez because she was on her deathbed, we were able to get a humanitarian parole for that person to go across, be with their grandmother, and then come back into El Paso without that affecting their chances or their status. That has completely ended under this administration. So an already cruel system has become that much more inhumane. Thank you for reminding us of that. Also, a path forward if we follow our best interests. So thank you.
We're going to come to Terry next and then Domingo, but before we get to Terry, Beto, just if you wouldn't mind, expand a little bit more, because what Chris was talking about too is the families who are affected that aren't even in this country.
Right.
The third element of your plan is really a robust package to help the Northern Triangle of Central America. Many of the immigrants that are here, their families are still there.
Right.
So what's the spirit behind that?
So let's talk about it in contrast to what the president just proposed, which is to diminish the ability of families to reunite through our immigration system. He calls it "quote unquote" merit-based, but what it does is fundamentally undermine our values as a country and the ability for children to see their parents again, as you just described, or siblings to be reunited. Our plan, by contrast, says let's prioritize families even more than we are doing right now, because it is the fundamental structure to the success of our communities and of our country. And I think the immigration attorneys are going to be more eloquent on this point, but right now when folks say, hey, Beto, I'm all about what you're talking about, but just have people follow our laws and get in line. We may not realize when we say that the line stretches 15, 20, 25 years in some cases for people to do the human thing, which is to be with their families. And what you just described, Chris, is an inhumanity that we are visiting upon one another. Not to be able to see close relatives, not to be with family members when they struggle through illnesses or celebrate milestones or pass on. We should not be doing this. And perhaps much of the country doesn't realize that we're doing this. Part of the reason it's so important for you to share that story and then connect it with expanding these visa caps and speeding the process of reuniting families in this country. Yeah, absolutely.
Terry and then Domingo.
Well, I read parts of this before I came today, and I'm very excited about it, and I thank you when you were elected that in the first 100 days we'll be putting your feet to the fire.
Absolutely.
And I trust that you're definitely up for that challenge. But I have a question that isn't addressed here, and I'm not necessarily expecting to have the answer, but I don't want it to be lost in the shuffle. That's 18 months away, and right now, today, while we sit here, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of people standing in line at the Respite Center in McAllen, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're grossly they're not funded. Frankly, they're not funded. It's all donation driven. It's all volunteer driven.
Right.
And that's just one location, and I know there's multiple locations around along the border. And what about those people now? What can we do for those people now? Because they literally arrive there with nothing but the clothes on their back. All they're looking for is a chance. All they're looking for is a bus ticket, maybe a clean pair of clothes, if they're lucky, a shower and a hot meal.
Right.
And then they go on to where they're destined to be going. And when I've been down there, the center is designed initially to handle maybe 80 people a day, and I've literally been there where 1,500 people came through. And I would like to know if you have any vision for what we can do between now and 2020.
Absolutely.
To give those people some hope and some assistance.
Absolutely. So a couple of things. One, let's make sure each of them has legal representation so that they can navigate our laws, follow our laws, and come to much better outcomes than they would otherwise. Second, we mentioned that community-based visa category that we're going to implement. So if Annunciation House in El Paso wants to sponsor an asylum seeker or a refugee or a family or many families, they're able to do so. And though El Paso is the third poorest urban county in the United States, I've been so proud of the way that without spending a dime of government resources, we've met that challenge much the same way that folks in McAllen are meeting that right now. Third, we're going to end the process of metering, which, as you probably know, means that CBP officers stand at the ports of entry and refuse entry to these asylum seekers who are only trying to follow our laws. If they can step foot in the United States and petition for asylum, that begins a process. We meter them, meaning that we force them to remain in Mexico, and many of them try to come to the United States in between ports of entry, where they're then arrested, kept in detention, then released out onto the streets in situations that you just described. And then fourth, yes, the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, has the resources to take care of people who can go nowhere else. And yes, it will benefit those whom we care for. It'll benefit this country even more. And to put it in perspective, we had last year 400,000 apprehensions on the U.S.-Mexico border. You contrast that with 1.6 million apprehensions during the second year of the Bush administration. This is nowhere near a crisis level. We have a president who's trying to create a crisis and chaos by the way he's meeting these refugees. But yes, let's ensure that they are taken care of, and it will be to our lasting benefit to do so. So thanks for raising that.
We'll go to Domingo and then Claudia and then Judge Moreno.
Well, I want to thank you because it's really a bold immigration outline and it throws the gauntlet to the rest of your candidates for the Democratic primary. I think Julian is the only one that's ever come up with anything, and it's really bold. But as you know, it takes bipartisanship to pass a bill in Congress. And assuming you become President Beto O'Rourke in 2021, and we have a Congress, that's Democrat, and maybe a Senate that's still Republican.
Right.
How can we form a bipartisan support for this? I know that you and Congressman Hurd had the famous road trip. How do we get bipartisanship on immigration when you have at least one FAR element, president, using it as a wedge issue?
I think your question highlights the fact that no one person, no one president, whoever leads the next administration will be able to do this on their own, and perhaps no one party. I'm not going to give up on the idea that we can have commanding majorities in both houses. We have, as a country, we have a very ambitious agenda. I want to make sure that we can see it through, and we will need those partners. But on the premise of your question, if we're working with a divided Congress, I think we need to take this fight to the individual congressional districts. I'll tell you from I don't know if you all know the name Steve King.
Yeah.
He's a Republican member of the House who's asked the question, what's wrong with white supremacy? Who has described Dreamers as drug mules. He said, look at the size of their calves, they're as large as cantaloupes. He is in the Trump tradition of trying to make us scared of people who represent the best future of this country. I was in his district in Iowa recently. I was in a city called Storm Lake, and I was in a little bakery run by a guy named Carlos, whose family from Mexico followed the meatpacking jobs. Again, working the toughest work that we have available in this country right now. And maybe like Emmanuel, as he made more than he needed to cover his costs, he invested in a restaurant, in the economic success and vitality of that community. The folks of Storm Lake in Steve King's district, they get that. I need to connect Carlos's story with the future of this country, with our immigration proposal, and make sure that they put the pressure on their representatives or change their representatives if they're not reflecting their best interests, so that we have partners with whom we can work. But used Will Hurd as an example, and there are others in Congress who have supported things like the DREAM Act, making sure that dreamers no longer have to fear deportation. I think that's the beginning of the conversation that we need to have. But we waited more than 30 years on this. We cannot wait and allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. We've got to move on this very early in this next administration if we have any hope of being successful, and it needs to be bold, it cannot be defensive, and it's got to be comprehensive. It's got to be all this coming in together. So thank you for asking that, Domingo.
I'm remaining cognizant of time, so we'll go to Claudia, and then George Moreno, we'll then go to Ann and the Imam.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Bueno, yo soy electricista y he sido testiga por 15 años de los abusos que han cometido muchos patrones con sus trabajadores. En primer lugar, el pago es más bajo con las personas indocumentadas. No tienen beneficios. Los someten a no tener protección y todo porque son indocumentados. O sea, ¿cuál es la diferencia de una persona que tiene documentos y la que no tiene? Si somos seres humanos y merecemos respeto. Entonces, yo quisiera saber si estas personas que han trabajado, yo he trabajado 15 años aquí y tengo 2 hijos que nacieron acá. Mi esposo también, él es indocumentado y trabaja junto conmigo, es electricista. Pero siempre estamos de un hilo diciendo, ¿y si nos agarra migración? ¿Y qué va a pasar con nuestros hijos? Si ellos merecen una calidad de vida como todos los hijos de ustedes. Ellos merecen ser libres y no crecer con miedo. Y estamos viendo también en las escuelas, que son escuelas de educación, donde se están formando todos nuestros hijos y ellos le están dando el pase libre a ICE, ellos están colaborando. ¿Cómo es posible? ¿Cómo nuestros hijos están creciendo con esa mentalidad de miedo? Cuando nosotros estamos queriendo formar hombres de bien, personas libres, y no estamos formando personas libres, sino que con miedo. Entonces, ¿cómo podríamos cambiar esto? ¿Y cómo podríamos documentar a todas esas personas que se lo merecen? Porque estamos aquí, supuestamente venimos para tener un sueño americano, pero ni siquiera tenemos la S del sueño. No llegamos a enriquecernos nunca por el sistema, cómo nos están bombardeando y nos están sometiendo. Somos sometidos, somos esclavizados aquí. Entonces, es un país de libertad. Y yo escuché en las escuelas a veces, porque soy voluntaria de las escuelas de mis hijos, cómo ellos rezan una oración, que somos un país libre, de justicia. ¿Dónde está la justicia? No la veo. Y queremos un país lindo, o que sea homogéneo, donde todos podamos ser libres y salir a la calle sin preocupación. ¿Y por qué tenemos que estar dándole y peleando por una migaja cuando este país es rico? Que estamos pidiendo DACA, estamos pidiendo el TPS, cuando nos pueden legalizar a todos y todos tenemos derechos. Y estamos enriqueciendo a este país.
Es claro que usted y su esposo han contribuido más al éxito de este país que han recibido durante su vida. Y yo quiero que pueden contribuir aún más como ciudadanos aquí adentro de su comunidad propio. Que sus hijos no necesitan tener miedo que vamos a deportar sus padres. Que cuando están trabajando puede tener un salario digno, más del salario mínimo, y ya sabemos que muchos de los que no tienen documentos tienen salario bajo del salario mínimo, porque viven en miedo y no pueden hablar con las autoridades sobre esta forma de abuso. Por eso queremos que los casi 11 millones que están bajo de la sombra de deportación pueden contribuir como residentes primero y luego como ciudadanos, porque es algo mejor para esas familias, pero mucho mejor para la economía de los Estados Unidos. Dicen que si podemos hacer vamos a ganar casi 1.2 trillones en los 20 años que vienen a la economía de los Estados Unidos. Y yo quiero compartir esa con la gente de este país que no entienden, no conocen los migrantes que están contribuyendo tanto al éxito de sus comunidades. Y también yo quiero compartir que los migrantes, además de trabajar, están los voluntarios en las escuelas, están trabajando con una comunidad donde no tienen ciudadanía y pueden hacer aún más si pueden hacer todo con su potencial. Y por final, esta práctica de ICE en nuestras comunidades, trabajando con las escuelas o con la policía para separar las familias, para poner miedo en nuestras comunidades. Necesitamos parar esa práctica, necesitamos enfocar donde tenemos amenazas y las familias no son las amenazas. Y si tenemos la reforma migratoria, yo pienso que mejor que tenemos ahora podemos asegurar las comunidades de los Estados Unidos. Y yo voy a reflejar su comentario, sus ideas y su historia con gente en otras partes del país. Gracias por su contribución.
So we'll go to the judge, and then we'll talk to Ann, and then the final word will stay with Imam Suleiman, given the time.
Thank you, Judge.
So one of the things that I see consistently with my deportation removal clients, the issue of bond. And I think the thing that's actually in the news a lot lately, we talk about bond and bail reform. I think there's an opportunity to include in your plan something similar for immigration bonds. Most people don't understand immigration bonds is not like a regular bond. You don't go to the bail bondsman and pay 10%. You have to pay it in full. And so we're expecting these immigrants, we're saying that they're not allowed to work here legally, but somehow they have to come up with money for $10,000, $20,000 bonds, and then they're just gonna sit there because what family of immigrants can afford that cash? They're selling their cars, they're trying to sell whatever off their backs to try to get them out of detention while they're sitting in privatized, which is a whole nother issue. We need to deprivatize the detention centers, but I do think that I'm hoping that we can figure out a solution for immigration bonds, because the kicker with that too is normally they'll pay the criminal bond, they'll go to the criminal bondsman, they have an ICE hold, they don't get released, they go to immigration, then we have to go to court to ask the judge, then they have to spend money for an attorney potentially to represent them, then they get stuck with a $10,000 or $20,000 bond, and if they don't get released, their cases can be done within 2 or 3 months because they're trying to just deport them as quickly as possible. And at least if they're able to get, I think, a reasonable amount for bond, then they can get released, go on a non-detained docket, and potentially have more time to present a stronger case in front of the immigration judge. Now, whether it's going to make a difference with these judges right now with the laws that we have currently that they're going to win, maybe not, but at least they had the time and the opportunity to have the time to talk to an attorney or to build their case versus they couldn't have paid this crazy expensive bond out of pocket and now they're just stuck sitting there. And sometimes too, you know, I had a client who got $20,000 and I was like, I know that sounds like a lot, but if you don't want to get deported and you know, this is your best shot. And he's just like, I don't want to wait to even have a hearing. I'd rather just sign my deportation order now because I don't want to sit in detention for 3 or 4, 5, 6 months. And that's another way that they're getting them because they don't want to sit in detention and they don't have the money to pay the bond. So I think that's something I would really love to get your comments or see something in your plan because we talk about it a lot from the criminal justice system, but I think there's an opportunity to also bring that up in the immigration.
Thank you so much for this. This is a great example of why we're doing this because while we do specifically say that we're going to end for-profit prisons in our larger criminal justice system and also in our immigration justice system, and while we point out that I think we're going to get well below a 75% reduction in the detained population through the family case management program as just one example, we do not specifically say that we're going to address the bonds that you just described. And we're seeing, even under the last administration, bonds that are set at 5 or 6 times what they were before, as though these families who've just arrived in their most vulnerable, desperate position are somehow a threat to us here in the United States of America. And as you just described, I've talked to many families who have quote unquote self-deported. They just can't do it. They can't wait it out. They're here with little kids, and they just can't take it anymore. And they're going back to countries where they know that they and their kids' lives are now going to be at risk. What would cause someone to do that? It's only if we made them so miserable through this process that we force them to do that. So, Cynthia, I want to make sure that in the next iteration of this proposal, we include this bond reform to complement ending for-profit prisons, ending this detention. Let's also squarely address bond reform. And if you would work with me on that, I'll take your guide and your lead. So thank you for raising that. Appreciate it.
Ann, and then the imam.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I was really interested in your proposal with respect to increasing the visa tax, not only with family, but also with employment, which is kind of my area of
Yeah.
expertise. So I represent a lot of clients who are in that line, like family members, and waiting for their green cards because, for example, those from India, they don't even know when they're going to get their green cards. It just stays at the same place forever.
Right.
And some of them are choosing to leave because of that issue. So it's, to me, very important to address those backlogs for these, laborers who are waiting for this process. One of the things you mentioned in here was the bureaucratic issues, and we're having 300,000 visas that are unused, and that definitely has to be fixed.
And they don't roll over.
They don't roll over, exactly, they're
Yeah.
lost.
Yeah.
And so, but the other part of that, I think, from my understanding, is that the numbers are counted in terms of family members. So a family of 5 takes up 5 visas. And my thought is, we should only be concerned really with the principal beneficiary, which is the employee. And the family members should come without taking away those visas from the pool of visas. That to me would free up a lot of that. So that's one of my suggestions in terms of looking at how we're allocating those things. The other thing is, this is kind of also related not only to family but to employment as well, is the unlawful presence bars. That is a real big issue. When I started practicing, they weren't there. I think in '92 they were implemented. And that really stopped a lot of people from wanting to go through the legal process because they have to touch back, and they're now told 10 years you're going to have to wait unless you have a waiver, which you may or may not get.
Right.
And so to me, for those who actually want to go through the legal process, are willing to actually have employers, for example, who want to go through that legal process for them. But the issue is, I can't go back and I can't take that risk.
Right.
So the unlawful presence bar to me has been one of the biggest barriers to people wanting to legalize. I know many of these people who are here, for whatever reason, they are out of status, undocumented. They've not been able to legalize when they could have because they have the people who are willing to help them with it. But that unlawful presence bar has been a real issue.
Yeah, and so we addressed this in the plan, and to the legitimate concerns about security and safety that our fellow Americans have, I think we can use the example you just gave. Folks are not coming forward out of fear right now, which demonstrably makes us less safe. They're less likely to report a crime, testify in a trial, serve as a witness. They want to have nothing to do with the criminal justice system. If we remove that fear by removing these bars, sometimes for technical violations of immigration law, we were meeting in El Paso yesterday with a gentleman who, born and raised in El Paso, law-abiding, tax-paying U.S. citizen, wanted to marry the girl of his dreams from Durango, Mexico. She, when she was 14, falsely presented as a U.S. citizen at a port of entry. 14 years old, and lifetime bar on re-entry into the United States. So their marriage ceremony took place at the international boundary line, and then they had to retreat back into Mexico. They're raising their child there. He crosses the border every day to work in his home country, the United States of America. We're losing out on everything that family would be able to contribute to our success. So we address these bars, and I'm gonna use that additional example you gave us to make the case to our fellow Americans about why this makes sense. And to your question about bipartisanship, we actually introduced a bill called the American Families United Act when I was in Congress that specifically tried to address this issue, and we were able to get some Republican and even some Republican Tea Party support on this. They wouldn't support us on full comprehensive reform, but they got how unjust and unwise and unsafe this part of our current laws. So thank you for raising that.
We're going to wrap up this discussion portion with the imam's comments, questions, and then we'll turn it over to Beto for closing remarks.
Great.
So I think that, speaking specifically from the Muslim community's perspective, and what that represents in terms of the idea of framing entire communities as being foreign threats.
Right.
Right. So whether you're talking about the immigrant community or the refugee community, or the Hispanic community as a whole, or the Muslim community as a whole, whose largest portion is African American, we are framed as not of us and a threat to us.
Yeah.
Right? So both foreign and dangerous. And we're up against these huge fear-mongering machines that cast entire communities, organizations, institutions in suspicion so that they do not get afforded the same level of civil liberties as other people. Now, based upon that, I think that one of the issues that we're facing here in Dallas in particular is the climate of fear that's been created by ICE. And I want to speak to that for a moment, because we've been particularly stung by that here in Dallas, more so than anywhere else in the country. And it literally paralyzes the entire community, not just the immigrant community. It paralyzes the entire community in this deep sense of fear and insecurity. And unfortunately, you know, when activists, and this plan is extremely bold, and so I want to speak to just one area of it where I'd like to hear you elaborate a little further on the ICE part. You know, when we talk about abolishing an agency that has no historic precedence but is guilty of historic abuses, it's like you're talking about abolishing the Navy. I mean, people make these assumptions that these agencies that were formed in these climates are historic American institutions, and they're not, but they're guilty of historic abuses. And I'd like to just hear from you a little bit more on how we increase, it says here, increase accountability from ICE and CBP personnel through improved training and continued education courses. What does accountability look like for ICE beyond just the process, but accountability so that entire communities, and this is leading to, as you mentioned, unreported crime, if anything, it's making us less safe. How do we start to change that climate and really rein ICE in, you know, for what it's doing to our communities?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And let me just begin by picking up on your very strong comments on this climate of fear, especially under this administration, and the way that some have been categorized as other than American, and by this president, other than human. When you describe someone as an animal or an infestation, that is other than a human being. And I think that is the predicate to putting a child in a cage. You can't make that connection unless you've been given permission to look at that child as something less than human being, or Muslims as inherently dangerous to this country. And I know we all know this around the table, but I think it's a point that bears repeating. It doesn't just offend us, or doesn't just fly in the face of the best traditions of this country. It leads to actions and practices that fundamentally change who we are. The mosque in Victoria, Texas being burned to the ground on the day that the Muslim ban was signed. This young Mexican-American girl at LBJ Elementary in El Paso in February of 2017 asking us, why does the president not like me? And when I told that story in Houston, a Muslim family saying, you know, our third grade daughter asked us the very same question. What does it do to that child's head and her conception of herself and what is possible for her in this country when the leader of our country describes her in that way? And so really important that we confront this, not, as some have said, in January of 2021, but absolutely right now. That was your point. What can we do right now? So I'm grateful that you called our attention to that. These internal enforcement practices of ICE, you're right, are not part of a long American tradition. It is part of the overreaction to 9/11 that included, in 1 year of the Obama administration, 400,000 internal deportations from the United States of America. And from what I know of President Obama, I know he did this with the best interests of this country at heart, perhaps trying to lay the groundwork for comprehensive immigration reform. I don't know. But what I do know is that it separated families and it caused some of the suffering that we've described around the table today. Going to places where I least expected it, not just Dallas, but East Texas, where communities have forever been changed by ICE raids. Parents who've been in the community for 10, 20 years kiss their kids goodbye at the beginning of the day when they dropped them off at school and never returned home and are in deportation proceedings or back in their country of origin right now. So this practice has to stop. We have to recognize, to Claudia's point, that these immigrants are not a threat to any of us. In fact, on net, they are contributors not just to the economy, but to our safety. and the security of our families and of our communities. So in an O'Rourke administration, the only case for internal enforcement is against somebody who poses a violent risk because they have committed acts of violence or are a known threat to our communities, not profiled based on their ethnicity, their country of national origin, or their religion. Those differences make no, are not meaningfully, should not meaningfully be considered as factors in internal removal operations. So abolish those practices of ICE and return the security conversation to bringing people out of the shadows, allowing our immigration laws to reflect our values, our traditions, the reality that we see here in our communities and on the ground, working with partners in the hemisphere and the world beyond to make sure that we're a partner to address problems in the home countries that cause people to flee in the first place, and stop terrorizing communities the way that we're doing right now. Thanks for raising this and asking this. And if I could have everyone's, and it's specifically your indulgence, Mirna, I know that you wanted to ask a question. I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to hear from you.
Como migrantes, o sea, venimos a este país para buscar un mejor futuro para nuestros hijos. En lo personal, el mejor futuro que podemos dejarle es la educación.
Sí.
Miguel graduó este sábado. Él estuvo
Felicidades.
Él estuvo bajo un plan 504 federal, en el cual requería acomodaciones especiales para estudiar al mismo nivel que otros estudiantes. En mi experiencia, estuve trabajando 12 años de voluntaria para estar siguiendo su camino. No hubo los fondos necesarios para que los planes se implementaran. No hubo el dinero para que llegara a los distritos y pudieran tener una educación equitativa al igual que esto. Mi pregunta es que usted tú como presidente, ¿cómo asegurarías que los fondos federales llegaran a los distritos?
Sí.
Para que la educación sea equitativa, para que el sacrificio que hacemos, particularmente todas estas personas que vienen sufriendo esto, entre ellos vienen muchos niños con los mismos problemas. ¿Cómo asegurarías tú que ese dinero llegara a los fondos para que tuviéramos una educación equitativa y nuestros estudiantes, nuestros hijos, que son la primera generación de inmigrantes, aseguráramos que se gradúen?
Gracias para la pregunta y felicidades. Y como presidente quiero que invertimos en los distritos escolares para pagar los maestros y maestras un salario digno, para que no necesitan trabajar 2 o 3 trabajos, pueden enfocar en los estudiantes y en su potencial en cada caso. Y necesita trabajar con comunidades como Dallas, distritos escolares como DISD, y con los estados, para que también en el nivel estatal tenemos los recursos para que no depende 100% en el gobierno federal para hacer Y luego quiero compartir o decir al país que esto es en el interés de todos. Si tenemos gente que tienen una educación, pueden ganar más durante su vida, pueden pagar más en los impuestos para apoyar las comunidades donde viven, y pueden contribuir aún más al éxito de este país. I'm going to close and add a little bit to this answer in English as well. Question is, how do we invest in school districts and in the education of our fellow Americans, regardless of English language ability at the beginning or immigration status, and make the case that this is in our mutual interest to do so? I want to make sure that teachers earn a living wage so that they're not working 2 or 3 jobs. If we make the necessary federal investments, we free up local school districts and trustees to support those teachers. And right now the federal government is paying a fraction of what it should to support world-class public school education. This is also an issue of civil rights, to make sure that every single child is able to obtain a world-class public school education. We don't have that in this country right now. That will be a priority for us. And one of the things that Miguel has shared with me in the past And I was just talking to your extraordinary county judge, Clay Jenkins, and he reminded me of this. I believe 54% of the kids in DISD are English as a second language learners. That population is greater than the entire student population of El Paso, Texas, the defining border city. So here we are in the heartland of America and the heartland of Texas, and it's beautiful. It is reflective of the future of this country, a community of immigrants who represent our power, our strength, our success, and our security, but we've got to make the investment in them in order for them to be able to realize that. So gracias para la pregunta. Thank you all for being here, contributing to this conversation. There's so many things that we wrote down that we will add to the plan. We want this to be a plan that was written by people, and you all are writing it for us, so thank you. Miguel, thanks for facilitating this. I'll allow you to have the last word.
I simply want to say on behalf of all of us, thank you for two different reasons. Thank you first for being willing to be bold with these concepts, to set the stage for the debate with all of these presidential candidates, to have it rooted in American values and what have always made our country great. And the second thank you is, you've proven to me with this plan that you've kept with the spirit of what I think made your campaign for Senate so successful. And that is you were willing to get out into the community, to throw out ideas, but to listen as much as you talked. And we have been removed from that type of politics for far too long. So on behalf of all of us, we'd like to all say thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for having us out.